The first time I set foot in Amish country, I didn't expect anything more than a quiet week surrounded by farmland, wooden fences, and the kind of silence I hadn't known in years. My wife, Sarah, thought it would be good for me, a short break from the noise of the city and from our routine. She was visiting her parents up north, and I was left with time to myself. At first, it felt like a blessing, but underneath, I knew it was also a way for us to avoid what we never said aloud, that our marriage had been running on fumes for a while. We were partners on paper, not in passion. I missed being wanted. The house I rented was simple, right by a stretch of fields that looked endless. Each morning, I woke up to the sound of roosters instead of car horns. I told myself I was here for peace, but the truth was, I was restless. I kept checking my phone for messages from Sarah that never came, scrolling through old photos of us when we looked alive in each other's arms. Something inside me ached, though I couldn't tell if it was loneliness or guilt for feeling lonely while married. On the third afternoon, a storm rolled in quickly, the sky turning from bright blue to a heavy gray in what felt like minutes. I had been walking near the fields, trying to clear my head, when the first drops fell. They weren't gentle. They were sharp, stinging, the kind of rain that drenched you in seconds. I spotted a barn up ahead, old but sturdy looking, with the classic slanted roof and wooden doors wide enough for horses. I sprinted, soaked by the time I reached it, and ducked inside, shaking water from my hair. The barn smelled of hay and leather, damp earth, and something sweetly natural. My eyes adjusted to the dim light, and that's when I saw him. A young man, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges, stood near a stack of hay bales. He was holding a wooden tool, probably mid-task before the storm interrupted him. His clothes were plain, black trousers, a loose white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, but on him they looked almost regal in their simplicity. He didn't startle when he saw me, just stared, his blue eyes sharp but calm. "Sorry," I said quickly, brushing water from my arms. Didn't mean to intrude, just try and get out of the rain. He nodded once, silent. Then, after a pause, his voice came low, steady. "It's fine." I could tell he was Amish by his clothes, his plainness, the way he carried himself without hurry. There was a quiet strength about him, like he didn't need to prove anything. I introduced myself, told him I was renting a place nearby for the week. He gave me his name, Jonas, and nothing more at first. His words were few, but his presence filled the space. We talked in fragments, the storm drumming on the roof above us. I asked if he worked a farm nearby. He nodded. I asked if the storm would last long. He said maybe an hour. Each answer was clipped, but not unfriendly. I found myself wanting to keep the conversation going, just to hear his voice again. The silence between us grew heavier than the rain outside. He kept working, lifting bales, adjusting tools, and I watched without meaning to. His hands were rough, strong, veins tracing his forearms. Every move he made seemed deliberate, grounded. I wondered what it felt like to be so sure of one's place, while I was drifting even in my own marriage. At one point, I reached for a nearby cloth to wipe my face, and when I glanced up, I caught him watching me. He didn't look away right away, either. It was subtle, but it was there, the kind of look that lingers half a second too long. My heart skipped. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. The air between us shifted after that. Our words slowed. Our eyes caught more often than before. My guilt pricked at me, but so did an undeniable pull, the sort I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just attraction. It was recognition, like he was carrying a loneliness of his own. When thunder cracked, he moved closer, not toward me but toward the doors to check the latch. Even then, being near him made me aware of myself in ways I thought I had forgotten, how my breath sounded, how my skin tingled, how badly I wanted someone to notice me again. I told myself I was just imagining it, that a married man shouldn't think this way. But the barn seemed to close us in, making the world outside vanish, leaving only him and me and a silence thick enough to drown in. As the rain poured harder, Jonas finally sat down on a hay bale across from me. His eyes met mine, steady, unreadable. My pulse thudded in my ears. I didn't know what I was waiting for, or if he was waiting too, but something had started between us. I could feel it building, slow and dangerous, like the storm itself. And in that moment, I knew that if the silence broke, if either of us leaned even a little closer, nothing about my marriage or my life would ever feel the same again. The storm outside didn't let up. The rain hammered against the roof, the sound filling every pause, every breath. Jonas sat there across from me, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped as if he were praying. But his eyes, those pale blue eyes, were on me unblinking. I shifted under the weight of his gaze, my chest tightening with a mix of nerves and something far more dangerous. I wanted to speak, to break the silence with something harmless, but my mouth was dry. It was Jonas who finally said, almost in a whisper, "You don't look like you belong here." His words cut through the tension, but not in the way I expected. There was no judgment in his tone, just curiosity, maybe even fascination. I gave a small laugh, rubbing the back of my neck, probably because I don't. City boy lost in the fields. He tilted his head slightly, a faint smile at the corner of his lips. Lost, maybe. His voice lingered on the word, as if he meant more than just my being stranded in a storm. Something inside me broke loose. The walls I had been holding up since my marriage began to dim slipped lower. My wife thinks this place will help me. I admitted before I could stop myself, but all it's done is remind me how empty I feel. He didn't flinch at the mention of my wife. Instead, he leaned back, considering me. "Empty," he repeated softly, as though tasting the word. Then he nodded slowly, as if he understood. There was a long silence, but it wasn't the same as before. It pulsed, alive, pulling us towards something unspoken. Jonas shifted, resting his forearms on his knees again, his body leaning closer, his eyes locked on mine. I felt heat rise in my chest, spreading through me, and suddenly the barn seemed smaller, the air thicker. He began and stopped, his jaw tightening. I waited, my breath caught. "I've never done anything like this," he finally said, his voice barely audible. My pulse thudded, my body aching with the weight of his words. He didn't need to finish the sentence. I knew what he meant. The forbidden edge of his confession struck me deep, because I had been waiting for something I couldn't name until that moment. "I haven't either," I whispered, though it was a lie. Not in this way. Not with this kind of need, raw and reckless. For a moment, we both stayed still, caught in the storm outside and the storm inside us. Then, slowly, carefully, I moved. My hand brushed his, not grabbing, just touching. His skin was rough, calloused from work, but his hand didn't pull away. It stayed there, warm against mine. He looked down at our hands, then back at me, his breath quickening. When he leaned in, it was hesitant, almost trembling, as though he was terrified of his own desire. Our foreheads touched first, the simplest connection, but it sent a shiver through me. Then his lips met mine, soft, searching, uncertain. The kiss was clumsy at first, both of us holding back, afraid of the line we were crossing. But when I pressed closer, when he exhaled into me with a sound that was half relief, half hunger, restraint shattered. His hand rose the back of my neck, pulling me in, and suddenly we were lost in it, desperate, breathless, starved. The hay scratched under us as we shifted, pulling each other down onto it. The barn smelled of earth and sweat, of wood and rain, but all I could focus on was him, Jonas, this quiet Amish man who carried loneliness in his eyes and fire in his touch. His body was solid against mine, unyielding and real. Every move he made felt both forbidden and inevitable, as though we had been pulled together by forces greater than either of us could resist. He gasped my name once, breaking the kiss, his lips swollen, his breath ragged. "We shouldn't," he whispered, but even as he said it, his hand slid over me, trembling but certain. "I know," I breathed, though my body betrayed me, pressing into him, craving more. The guilt was there, sharp and heavy, but it was drowned by the need coursing through me. This wasn't just cheating. It was awakening, being touched in ways I had been starved for years. Time blurred. The storm outside roared, the barn creaked, and we moved together, tangled in hay, sweat, and gasps. His inexperience didn't matter. What mattered was the way he held me, the way his body spoke, what his mouth couldn't say. For the first time in years, I felt wanted, Not out of obligation, not out of habit, but out of raw, unfiltered desire. When it was over, we lay there in silence, the rain easing to a soft patter on the roof. My chest rose and fell rapidly, my skin slick with sweat, my mind reeling. Jonas lay beside me, his eyes on the ceiling, his lips parted as though searching for words he couldn't find. The weight of what we had done pressed down on me even as warmth lingered in my chest. I thought of Sarah, of the vows I had broken, of the man beside me who had just crossed a line he might never admit to anyone. But when Jonas finally turned his head and looked at me, his eyes soft but burning with something new, I knew I wouldn't regret it. Not tonight. Not ever. Morning light crept through the cracks in the barn's wooden walls, turning the dust motes into golden flecks that drifted lazily in the air. I woke before Jonas, my body stiff from the hay, and my mind heavier than it had ever been. For a moment, I let myself watch him, his chest rising and falling steadily, his lips slightly parted, his face calm in a way that almost broke me. He looked innocent, untouched, and yet I knew what we had done had changed him forever. It had changed me, too. I slipped out of the hay and pulled on my shirt, my hands trembling as I buttoned it. My heart was still pounding, not from desire, but from the weight of what waited outside this barn. My wife, my vows, my life that suddenly felt like a lie. I told myself it was just a mistake, a single night lost to the storm. But even as the thought formed, I knew it wasn't true. It wasn't a mistake. It was the most alive I had felt in years. Jonas stirred, opening his eyes slowly, the blue of them catching in the morning light. He sat up, brushing straw from his hair, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavier now than it had been the night before. It wasn't filled with hunger. It was filled with consequence. I should go. I finally said, my voice rough. He nodded, though his eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite name. Regret? Relief? Maybe the same aching mixture that churned inside me. He didn't try to stop me, and maybe that was for the best. We both knew that whatever we had shared couldn't exist beyond these walls. I left the barn without looking back. The storm had passed, leaving the fields glistening under a pale sun. My shoes sank into wet earth as I walked back toward the rented house, every step heavier than the last. When I reached the door, I paused, staring at the place I was supposed to call home for the week, but it felt foreign now. My body was still humming with memory, my skin tingling with the ghost of Jonas's touch. That night, I called Sarah. She asked how my day had been, her voice light, distracted, as if she had 1,000 things on her mind that didn't include me. I told her it rained. I told her I spent most of the time inside, reading. Lies slid from my mouth easier than I expected. She didn't question me, didn't notice the edge of my tone or the way my voice cracked on certain words. She had grown used to distance. Maybe she welcomed it. Still, the guilt sat in my chest like a stone. I tried to bury it, to convince myself it was just a storm-born moment, something that would fade like rain into the soil. But as the days passed, I found myself replaying it piece by piece. The look in Jonas's eyes when our hands touched, the tremble in his breath when he whispered he had never done this before, the way the barn walls seemed to close around us, making the world disappear until only we existed. I told myself it was wrong, and yet my body betrayed me, craving that feeling of being wanted, of being seen. For years, I had been invisible in my own marriage, my needs unspoken, my desires shelved. Jonas hadn't just touched me. He had awakened me, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't unfeel it. On my last day in the countryside, I walked past the barn again. From a distance, I saw Jonas working in the field, his hat low over his face, his body moving steadily as though nothing had happened. He didn't look up. I didn't stop. Maybe he had already tucked that night away into some secret corner of himself, a place where it could never reach the surface. But for me, it refused to stay hidden. I carried it back with me to the city, back into my home, back into bed beside a wife who never knew. When Sarah touched me, it was out of routine. When Jonas had touched me, it had been out of raw hunger, as though he needed me as much as I needed him. That difference burned me alive. Weeks passed, and the memory didn't fade. If anything, it grew sharper. Sometimes, late at night, I'd wake with the taste of hay and rain in my mouth, my body aching with the echo of that forbidden closeness. I'd lie there in the dark beside Sarah, listening to her soft breathing, and feel the weight of my secret pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. I couldn't tell her. I wouldn't. This was mine to carry, a burden and a gift all at once. Infidelity is supposed to be shame, but what I felt was more complicated. It was guilt, yes, but it was also gratitude. For one night, in an Amish barn, I remembered what it meant to feel alive. And no matter how many years pass, no matter how faithfully I play the role of husband, I know this truth will haunt me. I got FK'd in an Amish barn, and I still think about it.